The calmest people often have the loudest minds. There's something strange about the people who seem the most composed. They don't raise their voice, they don't overreact, they know how to smile at the right moment, say the right thing, and keep themselves together even when the atmosphere around them shifts. From the outside, they look steady, almost untouchable, like nothing really gets to them. But that appearance can be deeply misleading, because some of the calmest people you will ever meet are not calm because their mind is quiet. They are calm because they learned how to regulate, suppress, and contain what other people never get to see. They are not peaceful. They are not empty of tension. They are not floating through life with some rare kind of emotional ease. Very often, they are carrying a level of inner noise that no one else can hear. Their mind is rarely quiet. It is scanning, adjusting, anticipating. It is replaying what was said, measuring what was left unsaid, noticing a change in tone that everybody else missed, preparing for outcomes that have not happened yet, and managing reactions before those reactions ever have the chance to show on their face. So when people say, "You're always so calm," what they may really be seeing is not peace. They may be seeing control. They may be seeing restraint. They may be seeing a person who learned a long time ago that silence was safer than expression, and composure was safer than being fully visible. That is the hidden truth behind a lot of calm people. What looks effortless from the outside may actually be an entire inner system working overtime just to keep everything contained. And once you understand that, a lot of people begin to make sense in a completely different way. Because there are people who seem mature when in reality they are highly self-managed. There are people who look emotionally stable when underneath that surface they are constantly editing themselves. There are people who come across as easy to be around, not because life feels light to them, but because they have become experts at carrying weight quietly. That kind of person usually does not announce what is happening inside. They do not walk into a room and say, "I've already thought through 6 ways this could go wrong." They do not explain that one sentence can stay with them for hours. They do not admit that while everyone else moved on, part of them is still reviewing the moment, trying to understand what it meant, whether they said too much, whether they should have said less, whether the shift they felt was real or imagined. They just appear fine. What makes this even more interesting is that psychology has studied pieces of this pattern for years. Research on emotion regulation shows that some people regularly suppress what they feel on the outside, even while a lot is still happening on the inside. And research on rumination shows how the mind can keep looping through conversations, meanings, mistakes, and possible outcomes long after a moment has passed. So sometimes what looks like calmness is not the absence of emotion at all. It is emotion being tightly managed while the mind keeps working in the background. And that is exactly why this pattern is so easy to misunderstand. People often assume that the loudest pain is the deepest pain, but psychology does not always work that way. Some of the most intense inner experiences happen in people who have trained themselves never to look messy in public, not because they are fake, not because they are cold, but because somewhere along the way, their nervous system learned that staying composed had value. Maybe it kept conflict from getting worse. Maybe it made them easier to accept. Maybe it gave them a sense of control in an environment where emotions felt unpredictable. When you grow up around tension, inconsistency, criticism, or emotional volatility, you start paying attention in ways other people do not. You notice the room quickly. You notice pauses. You notice facial changes. You notice when someone says, "I'm fine," in a way that clearly means the opposite. And at first, this can seem like maturity. It can even be praised. You become the reasonable one, the calm one, the one who doesn't make things harder. But what often develops underneath that is a hidden habit of internal overmanagement. You begin to monitor yourself before other people can react to you. You soften your feelings before they become inconvenient. You rehearse what you want to say so that it lands gently. You hold back parts of yourself because somewhere deep down, being too much feels risky. And once that habit becomes strong enough, it stops feeling like a strategy. it starts feeling like your personality. That matters because once a coping style repeats often enough, it can stop feeling like coping and start feeling like identity. In psychology, one close idea is over-control, a pattern marked by excessive self-restraint, emotional inhibition, and a strong need to stay composed. From the outside, that can look like maturity, discipline, or emotional strength, but underneath, it can also create distance, loneliness, and the exhausting feeling of always having to manage yourself before anyone else can react to you. That is why so many people live this way without realizing how much energy it costs them. They think, this is just who I am. I'm naturally quiet. I'm naturally composed. I'm just thoughtful. And sometimes that's partly true, but sometimes what they call personality is actually adaptation that became automatic. And the cost of that adaptation is not always visible right away. Sometimes it looks like fatigue you cannot explain. Sometimes it looks like being exhausted after simple social interactions. Sometimes it looks like lying in bed long after the day is over, not because anything dramatic happened, but because your brain is still holding the emotional weight of everything you noticed and never expressed. There are different forms this hidden calm can take, and not all of them come from the same place. Some people become what you could call the internal editor. These are the people who are almost always filtering themselves in real time. Before they speak, they have already considered how their words might be interpreted. Before they react, they have already imagined how that reaction might affect the mood, the relationship, the impression they leave behind. They are not simply talking, they are editing, they're trimming, adjusting, removing anything that might sound too emotional, too awkward, too intense, too needy, too wrong. And because they are so used to doing this, others experience them as polished, measured, and thoughtful. But what people don't see is how tiring it is to never speak from the first impulse, to constantly run your real feelings through a filter before they are allowed to exist out loud, to feel the pressure of being understandable at all times. Then there is the emotional absorber. This person feels everything in the room, even when nothing is being openly said. They pick up on discomfort quickly. They sense when someone is off. They feel tension before it becomes visible. And because they are so aware of other people's emotional state, they often begin managing that state without even being asked to. They become careful, accommodating, soft around sharp people, reassuring around distant people, less themselves around unstable situations. From the outside, this can look like emotional intelligence, and sometimes it is, but when it goes too far, it becomes something else. It becomes a life built around emotional anticipation, a life where you're never fully resting because some part of you is always tracking what other people might be feeling and how your presence might affect it. And finally, there is the self-controlled protector. This is the one many people admire the most, the person who seems strong in every difficult situation, the one who stays calm during chaos, the one who doesn't break down easily, the one who seems to carry pain with dignity. But what people often miss is that this kind of calm can come from years of learning that vulnerability had consequences, that showing fear made things worse, that expressing hurt did not bring comfort. So the person built a private rule inside themselves, feel it later, if at all. The problem is that later doesn't always come, so the emotions don't disappear, they just go underground. And when that happens, a person can start confusing emotional suppression with strength. They can become so identified with being the calm one that they no longer know how to exist without a layer of internal control wrapped around everything they feel. That is where the loneliness begins, because one of the hardest parts of carrying a loud inner world behind a calm face is that people respond to what they can see, and what they can see is someone who looks fine, someone capable, someone grounded, someone who probably doesn't need much, so they lean on you, they assume you can handle it, they bring you their chaos because you seem like a safe place to put it. Meanwhile, no one realizes how much you are already carrying. No one realizes that your silence is not always emptiness. Sometimes it's effort. Sometimes it's restraint. Sometimes it's 10 thoughts trying to pass through a very narrow opening.
Sometimes it's the emotional labor of holding yourself together so well that even the people close to you stop asking what is happening inside. That can create a very specific kind of pain. Not the pain of being unseen in a dramatic way, the pain of being misread in a subtle way, of being known for your surface, of being appreciated for your calm, while the deeper story behind that calm remains almost untouched. And over time, that disconnect can make a person feel strangely absent from their own life. Because when you're always editing, absorbing, and managing, you're not just controlling your expression, you are slowly distancing yourself from spontaneity. You stop trusting what you naturally feel. You stop moving from instinct. You stop letting your inner life arrive in its original form. Everything becomes processed. Everything becomes delayed. Everything becomes
Silence. Everything becomes filtered. Everything becomes performed just enough to survive.